What is going on, guys? My name is Hussein and welcome to another episode of Devtool them all. And today's website that we devtool, we're gonna devtool is Instagram. And if you're not aware, guys, this is the series where we pick a popular website and then just use devtool to look at the architecture effectively, just to look at what the client actually sends to the backend. And you will be surprised how much stuff we can learn about the backend just from the front end effectively. And this is what I'm doing. I'm just picking one website after the other and learning a few things from them. Today's is Instagram. So like we did with TikTok, I'm gonna go to a specific page directly, right? So I'm gonna go to instagram.com/therock and immediately hit enter. And let's see what we're gonna get. So we're gonna get beautiful. We get some connections here. I'm displaying the connection ID here, the time, the size of the document that we're gonna download, and the protocol. So this is this is what I'm displaying right here. And I'm gonna keep this running. The waterfall is gonna get smaller and smaller with time, obviously. But let's take a look at the first request. The first request took 105 milliseconds, obviously. And if I go, it actually returned a 301, which is a kind of a redirect, right? Which tells you, hey, you went to the wrong location. Go to another place, 301. Where is this the other place? It's kind of subtle, guys, but I don't know if you notice. The request URL doesn't have a slash at the end, but for some reason, Instagram didn't like that we don't have a slash at the end. So it actually didn't return the content at the first request. It actually told you to redirect to the same exact damn thing, but there's a slash at the end. It's a different website for some reason, right? So to me, that's just dumb, right? If it's a slash or not slash, it's the same content. So save yourself whatever 105 millisecond and immediately return the result. So I believe this is a wasted request, right? So I believe they can determine the difference between a slash at the end and not a slash at the end and then return the content, unless there's something we're missing here, that there's an actual difference between these two requested resource. But I digress. So we got this. I'm obviously, guys, I didn't tell you, but I'm logged in. I have to log in, otherwise Instagram doesn't work. I created a fake account just to do this test. Right? So we've been redirected now to the correct URL, right? Slash, there's a slash at the end now. And now we get a 200 and we get a beautiful HTML page. Now what you see is what you get. Now we get the skeleton page. What do we get here? We got a bunch of JavaScript, right? There's some JavaScript here. There's some pages. There's some links, because this is the languages, different languages that the Rock page supports, right? And what else? We're using the HTTP2 protocol. We're using the HTTP2 protocol. This is surprising because when I tested this, I think yesterday, I got the H3, which is the HTTP3, and I know that Facebook and Instagram uses HTTP3 and Quick in their backend. I made a video about this last year. They moved completely in their backend to HTTP3. So I'm surprised to see HTTP2. Maybe this is some legacy stuff with Instagram when it comes to the web browsing experience. So we got that. But it took us 1.5 seconds to download this. Again, guys, we are going through the VPN. When we're going through the VPN, obviously, every IP packet is encrypted and decrypted on top of the encryption and the decryption we get from the symmetric key negotiated by the TLS algorithm for the HTTPS, right? Which I'm going to talk about when I go to this tab, if I don't forget. All right, so let's go quickly through the first request just to show you. I usually do this with every request. So it was queued for 2 milliseconds. For some reason, the browser decided to queue the first request. And then we started the connection, was stalled for 0.2 milliseconds. Again, these are all things that we cannot control. Whenever Chrome got the control to actually queue the actual request. Then we got a 12 millisecond DNS lookup. So the DNS is really fast. So maybe this is a response from my local DNS recursor, whether I believe I'm using Cloudflare. So Cloudflare was very close to me. and I immediately cached the fact that Instagram.com has an IP address and got me the results. So that was fast. And then we got a 14-minute initial connection. This includes the SSL, which is always confusing to me. I don't know why the Chrome team decided to do this. This is equal this plus the handshake, effectively, right? So the 40 millisecond we see here, 27 is part of it, effectively, right? And this includes the actual SSL, which is the TLS handshake, effectively, right? So after the TCP, we go through TLS. What kind of TLS we have here? I believe TLS 1.3, probably. Let's take a look. Yeah, definitely TLS 1.3. Right, hopefully we don't lose anything. Did we lose anything? We didn't lose anything. Good. And then it took us 50. So up until here, we didn't send the request. 50 milliseconds to send the request. Then we started downloading the content, which took 107 milliseconds, obviously. Right. So that's the whole thing. All of that stuff just to get 1.7 kilobyte worth of content that is absolutely useless. Right? Because it told the first client, remember the first request just told me to go somewhere else with a slash. It's just, it's really wasteful if you ask me. So the second request, we don't have to go through it, but it's the actual HTML, took 1.5 seconds. Part of this is actually downloading the content, right? Let's actually take a look, right? Part of this is actually downloading the content. No, actually no. Part of this, the whole time is spent to get the first byte. That means this page, we didn't actually took 1.5 seconds to download the content, which is 80 kilobyte. No, we actually, the backend was spinning for over a second to give us this response. There's a very big difference, okay? So no matter how large this thing is, the client, the backend was processing this request, right? To actually generate the HTML. So whatever Facebook was doing to generate this HTML, it took a second. And that's, I think it's a lot. These should be cached, right? And then immediately return, unless there's something we're not missing. When we saw this with TikTok, I believe they were actually calculating these numbers and return them as part of the HTML. Let's actually confirm that. If I search for 29M, there you go. I was right. So they actually calculate the followers and the followings and all of this stuff as part of the generating the HTML. So they don't return a skeleton HTML page and then the client turns around and send 3 requests or whatever, 1 request to get all these 3 pieces of information. They got it as part of the initial request, which is a decision that the backend decided to do, and I don't think anything wrong with that. Obviously, I don't care about all of this stuff. This is all JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all that jazz, just to render and help animate all that stuff. And here's the first request that is actually interesting. Reels tray, and it's part of HTTP 2. And I want you to pay attention. All of these puppies are on the same TCP connection. All of those guys are on the same connection ID. And the beauty of this, because we're using H2, so every one of them can actually physically be sent on one stream, in one connection in parallel, right? It's not very clear with the waterfall because I believe we can't really zoom here. But yeah, because we're using HTTP2, we can send them in parallel. Granted that there might be some TCP head of line blocking at the server side to actually aggregate these streams. We don't have this problem with H3, but it's not really a big deal. But just another thing here. That's why people move to Quick, just to shave any seconds. But I mean, that's the thing. You're trying to shave things, but you do some dumb things like this, right? With the rock and this rock slash. To me, I don't know. Maybe I'll be the dumb one here and says, "Oh, Hussein, what's the difference? This is a huge difference between the two." Not really. Not really. I mean, yeah, you can say that there's huge difference, but in the back end, you can treat them as the same and then immediately return the content. Save yourself 100 milliseconds. Right. So let's go to the Reels tray. The Reels tray makes request to the httpi.instagram.com API version 1. So we're hitting the REST API for this one. And we're going to see in the minute that Instagram obviously uses GraphQL, because the GraphQL is a technology invented by Facebook. So when they bought Instagram, they moved all their API to GraphQL. And as a result, obviously, there must be some legacy REST API left, and we're still using them. So obviously, we've seen the options. Anytime you try to go to a domain that is not yours, and when I'm saying not yours, we are in Instagram.com, we're going to i.instagram.com. As a result, the Chrome says, different domains. I know it's the same subdomain, but no, different domain. Send an options. Am I allowed to make a request to this? And that's a good thing. We want to send an options in these cases. But in this particular case, Instagram is owning the whole thing, you know? This is not like Netlify, where we want to send the cookies and we send request when, I don't know, Hussein.netlify.com and, I don't know, David.netlify.com are completely different entities. No, this is the same thing, right? So we don't really need to send an options. So I don't know, where do you put that knowledge in Chrome to teach it? I believe there is a public global directory that share all this information, but regardless, we have to send in options because it's a different thing. And Reels, if you don't know, Reels is this is the TikTok thingy for Instagram, or the 15 second mindless scrolling, effectively. Reels, right? So we send, hey, am I allowed to request this? And obviously Instagram says, sure, you're allowed as long as the origin is Instagram.com. That's it. That's the only origin is allowed to make this request, right? Which is correct, right? We are on Instagram.com, so you are allowed to do that. By the way, all this mumbo jumbo is not available. There is nothing like that in the mobile app options. This is all browser technology, browser restrictions, if you will, right? And obviously, we send another request in parallel to get the timeline. Identical. The actual timeline, I believe this is the pictures that the Rock has. These guys, I don't want to hover over anything so we don't send more requests. But we get the timeline. Beautiful. What else? SDK, software development kit. I don't know, some JavaScript that does more stuff. Single sign-on users, that's me. Collection types, some more JavaScripts, and credentials. Highlight tray. This is interesting. So guys, every time you see an options, which we see these two options requests, there must be an actual follow-up actual request after it. We're looking for those requests soon, but we're getting a flood of requests here. Highlight tray. The highlight tray is very interesting. These are including the highlights, these guys, right? If you use Instagram, you know what highlights are. You know, and well, target user, what is this? Another thing, we're querying about information about the user friendship here, right? Another API, and all these are options. We didn't really do that. A story, same thing. It's all options. Just think about all the wasted requests here. These are not actual requests. These are permission request for permission to send a request. This is what options is, really. It says, hey, am I allowed to call you? That's what it means. So we send like 5, 6, 8 requests now, all options. They better follow the actual content. So some images, and here's the first request. An actual GET request because we now can make a request to the REST API, and we get the Reels. We get back a JSON. And you can notice that this JSON is just a bunch of REST stuff, right? These are the actual Reels. What do we get back here? Reels tray. There's nothing really in the tray per se, so we didn't really load anything. That's very fascinating because the Rock does have Reels, and the Reels is not active technically if you think about it, right? So it didn't really load anything. Fascinating. I don't see anything. Some emojis, and that's pretty much it. And then collection types, right? Not sure what's that. And then timeline. This is what we really need to be interested in. Payload timeline is empty. Fascinating. Highlights. Here's some highlights. Okay, this is interesting. Cover media. right? You're giving the actual results here. We get highlights. What else? Another highlight, cover media, cropped images. So we're connected to obviously a CDN to return the content of itself, both in the highlights reel and the thumbnails for those, right? So if I copy this thing, right, and I go to a new page and I say paste, what do we get? This is the highlight thumbnail, right? So these are these guys, okay? This is just the thumbnails effectively. I don't see the actual content. So probably users. Oh, there's a user here. Let's take a look at the user object. The user object. The rock. All right, so very lightweight. Very lightweight user object. Not compared to TikTok. TikTok actually returned the whole damn user object in every single item, which was very expensive. So at least in Instagram case, they only return very lightweight user object. I like that. Story. No story because the rock doesn't have a story right now. What a target user. That's probably okay. So these are the users that are suggested to me effectively. Look at that. Marvel Entertainment, National Geographic, obviously the top things. Badge. The badges. I don't know what badge is. What is a badge? I'm not sure what's that. All right, guys, so we continue reading. We see that there is a bunch of these log client events. This is just, I believe, some tracking information, if I'm not mistaken. So these are obviously any movement I do in the mouse, anything, you will see that. And there's where the first request that I can tell, where we see the query to get the items. And let's take a look at this. We're hitting instagram.com/GraphQL to do that, right? So that's why we didn't need to do an options, because this is the same domain. That's the effective part, obviously, calling the same domain. What we saw earlier probably is just legacy stuff effectively. But here's it. We're GraphQL. We know Instagram is using GraphQL. So what we're sending some request. Hey, give me anything after this item. Effectively, what do we get back? We get a bunch of items here. Obviously, as part of the query, GraphQL, if you don't know, guys, it's this back-end technology that Facebook built that allows you to send a query through the HTTP protocol to ask exactly for what you want from the backend. So now, as opposed to the REST API, which you request a resource and you get whatever the backend gives you with all the fields, right? Or whatever the fields for that resource that you asked for. GraphQL kind of makes this more flexible. Granted, obviously, to me, I believe GraphQL is always an overkill, especially when you get into the weeds of what you need to do in the backend just to get it right. Plus, it just adds a huge leaky abstraction on top of the things. Sometimes you're gonna get into problems with N+1 and things that you don't really know what the backend is doing anymore. And I don't like that. That's just a personal opinion. You can have your own opinion, obviously. I prefer the REST API, and you can pass in a parameter that say, hey, I want these fields. Doesn't break the REST API protocol or anything like that. You can do that. Make it much simpler on the backend. Obviously, Facebook is Facebook. It's huge, and they have tons of clients that every one of the client has different requirements, and they cannot do that with REST. So when you want to implement GraphQL, think about that, right? Don't just bring GraphQL into your backend just because Facebook has it. The cost is high. Right. So when we return the count. How many actual items does the rock have? Very valuable. Think about the cost of calculating that when you actually return it, right? It's not easy. It's not cheap to return the number of items. Granted that users don't usually post a lot of items, right? But you can query for that and get it. But caching here becomes really interesting if you want this information. How many items do you have for that particular request? Obviously, the idea of GraphQL has this idea of edges and nodes, and you can see that every edge, every node has a type. So we have a graph image, graph video image, and you have a sidecar. I was just like, what is a sidecar? Sidecar is basically a collection of things. If you, I don't know if you notice, if you use Instagram, you can post a group of images. This is apparently is called a sidecar. Who knew? We're learning new things. So we can see that this is, for example, this is an image. Obviously, the GraphQL doesn't return a blob of the image. It just tells you that, hey, this is the CDN location. So let's just copy and paste. There's one of the images. Okay. Nice it is. Very nice. Other stuff, other useful information here. The ID. And obviously, most of this stuff, I don't believe it's optimized for the browser. Do you really need all of this stuff at the end of the day? I'm not sure. Again, I like, because we're using GraphQL, you have this flexibility to ask for partial information about the user, something you don't have with the REST API unless, of course, you configure it, right? So you can, hey, the user, I don't want the whole user object. I just want the name and the ID. So you return only that. If you want more, you can ask for more, and that's the beauty of the GraphQL. But it's very hard to configure and get right. And the queries that that GraphQL results in can be so expensive. So be careful with that when you decide to implement that. Thumbnails, obviously, you notice that we return all possible type of thumbnails: 150, 240, 320, 480, 640, and these are stored in different location, right? So it's kind of nice if you think about it. So you can download exactly the one you need. Right? Granted, you can think that you can resize this in the client side, but why not? Just have it in the backend and just download the actual one you need. All right. So just like TikTok, we have the idea of the cursor concept here, where, hey, this is where my end cursor, and basically this is just one of the items, really. It's like, hey, this is where I reached when I last queried. And my page, my scrolling has more pages. So this is to tell the client that, hey, if you continue scrolling, you're going to see more stuff, obviously, right? And we didn't, let's go ahead and open one of the images and see if we have these counts, really. It's like, where is this information stored about the metadata? Like how many comments and all that stuff. Edge media to comment, 4,000 comments. Is that what it is? Oh, that's the comments here, right? Caption, preview, like, how many likes, I guess. This is how much like this picture got. But this is all of that stuff, so you can display it right here, right? This much likes, this much comments, because you only query for the things that you absolutely need, and that's the power of the GraphQL, right? Here, especially for a big company like Facebook. What else? Yeah, the rest of the things is really nothing to write home about. One thing I noticed is this thing. Look at this. WebSocket. What is WebSocket doing on Instagram? What am I doing, WebSocket? So apparently there is an option to chat here. So they initiate a WebSocket connection and they exchange some information, and I have no idea what is this. Every few seconds, if actually more, every millisecond, is it? They keep exchanging this information, right? They send this some payload. I can't really read that much, but there is payload being exchanged. So WebSocket is being used in Instagram. Of course, I didn't chat or did anything. So, but maybe if you do support chatting, you might get this data, right? So finally, let's look at the security concept here. And you can notice that when I open security tab here, so you can notice that we're using TS 1.3 with this key exchange algorithm, X25519, Diffie-Hellman, obviously, curve, and AES 128 Gauss counter mode, right? So 128-bit very small size, perfect security wise, all good stuff. And look at this, it's pretty neat. I kind of like what Instagram is doing with the page. If you compare this to TikTok, you're gonna see tons of origins. For Instagram, they only loaded 4 origins. graph.instagram.com, granted that we didn't see any query to graph.instagram.com, we saw to instagram.com/graph. Very different, obviously. I don't remember where did they, I don't remember seeing that domain, right? As a GraphQL. Facebook, obviously, to track me, right? Across where am I going? Instagram.com itself, and the CDN itself. S-Content LAX, I believe this is LA because I use the VPN that is in LA, right? And then the CDN Instagram.com, right? To give a kind of final thoughts about this is a not bad front end. I like the front end a lot. I mean, the back end, they can use this HTTP3, save themselves some traffic when it comes to this TCP head of line blocking and that all that jazz. But in general, I think this is dumb, right? If people do a slash and then I get redirected to the same page just without a slash, that's kind of a wasted effort in my opinion. But in general, I think this is good. The idea of using GraphQL is obviously genius. I don't know if all of us engineers can just use GraphQL. It's just a very heavy weighted, it's a, how do I describe GraphQL? It's a two-edged sword, really, right? If you hold it the wrong way, you're gonna bleed yourself, you will bound to send a query that will tank the database and you will have no idea what you're going to do. This is exactly like ORMs. Why I don't like ORMs, because they keep doing these magic things on the back end, and if you don't know how they work, you will end up tanking your database. Obviously, if you know how GraphQL works in and out, every single request, you know how the output will be, and you know how your ORMs are working, obviously you can use them. But as long as you work with a black box and you are blind, obviously it's going to tank the database and it's going to tank your performance at the end of the day. Again, at the end of the day, this is just my opinion and you can obviously have your own. I'm going to see you on the next one, guys. Stay awesome. Goodbye.